Hey there, everybody. Welcome to My Green Pets. I'm William Green, and today's episode we're going to be talking about the cultural conditions that my plants are under, and specifically we're going to talk about the pots that I have them in and the different media that I have them in. So, my plants are actually growing in a commercial greenhouse where I rent space, and so one of the most important things of orchid culture I don't actually have any control over, and that is the watering. See, the commercial greenhouse has a watering system that they use to water all of their thousands of plants. And the wing that has the rental spaces, it is fed by the same watering system. And so the first plants I want to show you are these two Cattleya rex plants, and these plants are mounted on pieces of hickory bark. They were glued to the hickory bark about 5 years ago as seedlings, and they've continued to grow these past few years, and they do really well. The roots are able to dry out completely between waterings. Now, pretty much everything else that I have in my collection is potted in this. It's a mix of big, chunky horticultural grade perlite as well as some chunks of fir bark, I believe. And this is provided by the commercial greenhouse where I rent my stuff, Fantasy Orchids. Okay, so the next kind of airiest pot that I have are these big net pots. I mean big net in that the spaces between the netting are pretty big. And this is really good for plants that need to dry out in between waterings. For example, the Cattleyas, they don't do well in media that stays soggy. It's got to dry out. And as you can see, this one that was recently repotted into that bark is actually doing pretty well in the net pot. So the plants are able to dry out. Now the one plant that I have in a net pot that stays pretty soggy is actually this one. It's Bobo medusae. It's a bigger net pot, and the bottom layer of it is just sphagnum. And the reason I did this was because I thought that it was going to dry out too fast and that the sphagnum would actually keep the plant good and moist. But because the greenhouse is so humid and because the watering schedule is pretty regular, I think that I could pot this plant up without any sphagnum and it would still stay moist enough. Alright, so we're looking at the bud of Bobophyllum echinolabium Hal, which is on its 15th flower and possibly its last one. It's got two new growths pushing out, and Hal is actually potted in a 9-inch, I think it's a 9 or maybe a 10-inch water lily basket. These baskets are for water lilies or any kind of plants that you would have in a pond. So here's what the basket looks like. I've actually got another set of Bobophyllums in that same size basket as well. And it's nice because since the holes are a little smaller, the medium stays wetter. Now I'm still using that bark perlite mix in this basket, but it does seem to stay wetter. And if the plants are only watered every few days, it's still the core of that medium still stays pretty damp. Now I only have one plant that is actually in clay, and that's this little Cattleya rex. This is a little clay pot. It's got 3 holes on the sides, and then of course got 1 hole down in the bottom. And clay is great for plants that need to dry out as well because it kind of wicks water away and then it evaporates really quickly. So this plant was recently repotted. Hopefully it's going to do well there. Alright, the rest of the pots that I have are plastic pots that do not have any kind of holes in the sides. These are Rand's air cone pots, and you can see this Catasetum fungsing is doing very well. It is potted in sphagnum moss that's been tightly packed at the top, and then there's a small layer of that thick or that large grade horticultural perlite at the bottom, and they seem to be doing well. Now this is a Phalaenopsis schilleriana, and it likes its roots to be kept moist, so the plastic is a good choice because it's not going to dry out in there. This is another air cone pot, and it's actually more like half sphagnum, half perlite and bark in the bottom. The roots just seem to be enjoying that moist environment, but there's still some air circulation there at the bottom so they don't suffocate. Now, for plants that need to dry out completely, like these Cattleya rex, they actually are stuck in these plastic Rand's air cone pots, and they don't have any medium around the roots at all. And even so, it stays moist down there. It never dries out completely. The watering schedule is pretty regular in the greenhouse, and I think that they actually might be staying too wet in those pots, so they might be getting transplanted out. Now, Bobo phylums really like having their roots constantly moist as well, and this one is an antoniferum. It's in a round plastic pot that's got holes in the bottom but no holes on the sides, and it seems to be doing pretty well. The roots are kind of reaching down into the medium. It's got 2 spikes on it, and as you can see, even when the top gets dry, the bottom still stays moist. Here's another catasetum type in a plastic pot. This is Momodia Jumbo World. Its bulb from last year is about half the size of this year's bulb, so that's great news. It's also planted in a tightly packed sphagnum and then a couple of inches of bark perlite mix at the bottom, and it seems to be enjoying that as well. Now, the slipper orchids that I have are all planted in plastic pots that don't have holes in the sides, and the smaller slippers have this medium that it's not that big chunky bark perlite mix. It's more like a fine bark, and this is how they also have a layer of styrofoam peanuts at the bottom of their pots to give them a little bit more air around their roots, but they tend to stay moist all the time. Now, there is one Cattleya rex that's been repotted, I don't know, 5 times this summer. I made the big mistake of repotting it right before it bloomed. It didn't have a lot of roots to begin with, and I think several were destroyed, and as you can see, the plant is really struggling to take up water. Its current bulbs are very shrunken. The leaves are even starting to shrink. And so my top priority for this plant right now is to stimulate it to put out some roots. Doesn't have to be a lot, maybe just 1 or 2 decent roots hopefully would save this plant. Now, its most recent growth is actually looking pretty good. It's not got any wrinkles. The bulb is very, very slightly wrinkled, but this bulb has only got 2 little pieces of root that grew out of it before kind of stopping, and so I'm hoping that some rooting hormone is going to create some side roots to push out of those and give the plant something to work with for its next growth. And the last thing I want to show you guys is this is Cattleya rex. All the flowers have fallen off my Cattleya rex. They ended up lasting about 3 weeks, but one of them was pollinated at the beginning of August, and this is what the seed pod looks like so far. It's kind of got flat sides to it, but it has without a doubt started to swell up, and hopefully pollination was successful, and we're going to have thousands and thousands of fertilized seeds ready to go in about a year. Well guys, that's all I've got to share with you today. If you've got any more questions about how my plants are grown or what the conditions in the greenhouse are, please feel free to leave a comment and I will get back to you within a day or two. And looking forward to updating you next week. So until then, happy growing, and we'll see you next time right here on My Green Pets. See ya.